We feel now you be a leader filled with might, cause we're awakening.
Awakened Radio Network is brought to you by our sponsors. Visit and let them know you heard about them here on the Awakened Radio Network. Do you have health and medical problems the regular medical system cannot seem to figure out how to fix? If the answer is yes, then check out rifeenergymedicine.com. That is Rife spelled R-I-F-E. rifeenergymedicine.com for a new way to approach many of your health problems. rifeenergymedicine.com. Are you looking for a fun and easy and productive way to promote and advertise your personally owned business? If so, the Awakened Radio Network just might have the solution for you. Visit awakenedradio.net and look up under our products and services tab. Or add Awakened Radio to your Skype contact and send Donna Devane, the station owner, a message. Or you can add DonnaDevane@gmail.com to your email contacts and send Donna an email letting her know that you would like to set a time to go over how to advertise your business in a way that makes getting sales easy without the struggle and a whole lot of fun. Do you have a message, something that just burns within you that you couldn't stop talking about even if someone offered to pay you to? Well, you just might be the type of host that we're looking for here on the Awakened Radio Network. Add Awakened Radio to your Skype contacts or send Donna Devane, the station owner, a message, DonnaDevane@gmail.com. And let's set up a time to talk and see if you and Awakened Radio Network are on the same consciousness wavelength. We might can work together and provide a win-win where your message goes out on our airwaves, reaching our global listeners, bringing fun, self-growth, and a whole lot of excitement to both your life and the Awakened Radio family.
Welcome to Simply Conversations. This show airs every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 Central. Each week, we have a new conversation with a guest who will share their story with us about how they've changed or healed their own life. Listen to our discussion and be inspired. This show is brought to you by simplyconversations.com. Feel free to take part in our chat room, ask questions, and talk with our guests. Hello, thanks for tuning in to Simply Conversations. I'm Rob Ragozzine, your host. It's January 26th, 2014. Tonight, we'll be speaking with Dr. Jeri Mills, who is a physician, veterinarian, intuitive healer, teacher, author, and storyteller. She's had articles in women's health magazines and appeared in newspapers and journals all over the world. She's also published several books, and she's lectured internationally about integrating Western and Eastern and energy medicine together. So with that, I invite Dr. Jeri on tonight. Hello, Jeri.
Hi, Rob.
How are you tonight?
I am well. How are you?
I'm very well, and I want to thank you for spending some of your downtime with us tonight. I know you've been very, very busy, so thank you for taking some time and coming on the radio with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Now, we had talked about some energy healing. We talked about gluten sensitivity. I guess let's start with some of the gluten sensitivity issues. How can someone know if they actually are sensitive to gluten? We see a lot about it in the news, a lot of food allergies, but how can we truly know if that's the case for us?
Well, Rob, there are a number of symptoms that people can get as a result of gluten sensitivity. They're basically related to inflammation of the intestinal tract, and they can be anything from nausea, vomiting, or diarrhea to bloating and abdominal pain after certain meals. About 10% of the people who are sensitive to gluten actually have celiac disease, which is an autoimmune condition that can be diagnosed with a very specific test. The best way for the majority of people to find out if they are sensitive to gluten is to completely eliminate it from their diets for 2 weeks. And it will take 2 weeks for the symptoms to go away because we're dealing with an inflammatory condition. And if their symptoms completely go away after 2 weeks of being off gluten, that's pretty much their diagnosis right there.
Now, does it typically take longer or shorter periods of time for other people, or is it generally 2 weeks, Jeri?
Well, somebody with severe celiac disease could take longer, and those are the people who are really sick and usually have sought medical care and had a diagnosis. But for the average person looking to see if they have some type of a sensitivity, 2 weeks on a complete elimination diet will give them a pretty good idea. And of course, when they go on an elimination diet, you can't cheat at all because we're talking about an allergy. So it only takes a little teeny bit of gluten to cause a reaction, which means that if you have a little soy sauce or a little MSG or a modified food starch in the barbecue sauce that you use, that can be enough to completely nullify a test. So people need to read labels very, very carefully and do a true elimination diet. And usually within a couple weeks, the majority of people will have a very good idea whether or not it's going to make a difference for them.
Now, what about all these snack foods, quick foods that are popping up in the stores that are supposed to be gluten-free?
Well, if they're labeled gluten-free, they're going to be. There's pretty strict control of that type of labeling. There are two different kinds of labels that people can find. One is free of gluten ingredients, and the other is a label that actually says certified gluten-free. If something is free of gluten ingredients, it may have been produced on equipment that also process wheat or barley or some other gluten-containing product. And there could be minute traces in that. Most people can get away with those types of contamination in very small amounts. People with true celiac disease absolutely cannot. So, if you're going to go see a doctor, you can get a blood test. And if you have celiac, then you could still be one of the 9 people out of the 10 who are sensitive to gluten who don't have celiac, however. So that's why elimination diets can be useful.
So to pay attention to what you're eating and definitely read the labels.
Read labels, and there are a lot of snack foods that are just gluten-free by virtue of the fact that they never had any gluten-containing ingredients in them, like corn chips. So sometimes I think you end up paying a lot more money for labeling. But, if you're doing something for 2 weeks, most people can avoid any of the packaged foods and just go with some pure foods for a couple of weeks. And that would certainly give them the most accurate test.
But shouldn't they be eating more naturally?
Well, it'd be nice, but, I think you have to walk before you can run. Like, you can't say, I want you to give up everything because you should and it's better. We have to be a little bit realistic in life, too. And, certainly we're all going to eat a little chocolate once in a while or a piece of cheesecake, or why bother living? But Ideally we should all be eating the way our ancestors were eating in one way or another, and that's not going to happen quickly because of people's lifestyles. So we have to be realistic, Rob.
Mm-hmm. What about supplementation and vitamins? Do you think they have value?
Well, one of the things about a gluten-free diet, which is why it's not something that is just, quote, good for everybody, is that a significant portion of the B vitamins that we consume in our diets come from grains that contain gluten. So if people don't have gluten allergies, just going off of gluten because it's in style may result in, for them or for people who have true gluten sensitivity, may result in B vitamin deficiencies. So a good multivitamin or a good B complex are probably not a bad thing for anybody. Certain of the fat-soluble vitamins can be overdosed, so it's important that people don't take more than recommended amounts, most specifically of vitamin A and E and D. Not enough D can result in depression and even an increased risk in breast cancer, but too much vitamin D has been shown in several studies to be associated with an increased risk of pancreatic cancer. Excesses of vitamin A can cause severe birth defects in babies if mom has too much vitamin A when she's pregnant. So it's important that we don't assume that if a little is good, a lot is better. But in general, since we don't have perfect diets, most of us, supplementing with minimum daily requirements of the fat-soluble vitamins, and also trying to get food that contains those vitamins, like vitamin E is readily available in nuts and avocados even.
So there's plenty of it available.
Yeah, so, some of this stuff is doing your homework, and some of it is, I guess it's all doing your homework. It's about paying attention to what you eat and learning a little bit about food and not just grabbing what's at the fast food restaurant on the corner between work and school or work at home. And that's unfortunately what so many Americans have come to do.
Now, Jeri, do you recommend finding ways to detox while you're changing your diet?
There are a lot of simple detox modalities. Some of the products that I've seen in health food stores and online can be actually a little bit dangerous. Probably the best way to begin detoxifying is just to stop eating toxic foods and drink a lot of water so that your body can flush the foods. Beyond that, I think specific supplements are not something that I'm going to recommend universally because there's no such thing as a completely safe supplement. People have allergies, people have sensitivities, people have possibly medications that can interact with various supplements or herbs. I think one of the most dangerous things I ever heard on the air was a now extremely famous integrative medicine physician back in 1996 speaking at grand rounds that I was attending at a hospital where I worked. And he said, I can give anybody herbs because I know that they're natural and nobody will get hurt. And that's absolute nonsense. I mean, digitalis is an herb. Cyanide comes from plants. So we need to know what we're doing and how much is safe. And that's way beyond anything that we can touch on tonight on a little 1-hour radio show.
But wouldn't it be more safe to work with your doctor on all of this?
A physician, a nutritionist, a naturopathic healer. I think you need to find people who actually have knowledge, and their background, the specific degree doesn't always represent the amount of knowledge. Some of it is their interest in a specific area of the profession they're in, whether it's naturopathy or Western medicine. Some nutritionists are going to know a lot more. I'm not sure how to put this. Some nutritionists will have taken a much greater interest in some of the more modern approaches to nutrition than what was taught in school if they were educated 20 years ago. So I think you have to sort of get a sense with whatever practitioner you go to of where their interests lie and where yours lie. You know, when people are starting to change their diets, though, Rob, they need to do things gently. Like if you take away everything somebody likes, after about a week they're going to get really sick of it and they're going to say, oh, the heck with this, and they're going to go out and they're going to eat everything that they were trying to avoid. So, you know, I've seen, and there are a lot of gluten-free cookbooks, and mine is not one that does that, but there are a number that are gluten-free, dairy-free, egg-free, and nut-free. And for some people that's necessary because of their food allergies. But if I take somebody who's been eating anything they wanted to for their whole life and try to take all of those things out of their diet at once, it's going to last about 10 minutes. And they're going to say, the heck with it, and go out to McDonald's. So my approach is to try to get them to do what they have to initially, which, you know, in this case of an elimination diet, or if they've had a diagnosis of celiac, is just to remove the gluten and then go from there and, you know, let them make choices that are going to work with their lifestyle and their preferences and make changes gently so that they're realistic. Even in all the years with my cardiac patients and diabetics where we're limiting glucose or fats, you know, I always tell them there's no such thing as calories on Christmas and your birthday. And it doesn't mean that you can go out and eat enough to give yourself a heart attack, but it means if you want a piece of steak, you have one. Or if you're a diabetic and you want a piece of birthday cake, you have one. Because if you don't do it occasionally, you're eventually going to chalk up the whole thing. Now, with gluten, that's not the case because it takes 2 weeks for it to get better. And that's why when I did my cookbook, Gluten-Free with Dr. Jeri, I have a lot of sensible recipes, but I also have some obscenely decadent dessert recipes that are not the kind of thing that you'd eat every day because they have, quote, unhealthy things in them, but they're wonderful and delicious, and they satisfy cravings. And I think everybody needs to have a little bit of something special every once in a while. Otherwise, they're not going to stay on a diet. And they have to do it within the realms, of course, of what won't make them sick.
And, Jeri, it's about paying attention to your body as you're making these changes.
Oh, absolutely.
Just to connect in and recognize what you're doing.
Yeah. And it's about not asking too much of yourself. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have high aspirations, but I think if we start off by beating ourselves up and going for total deprivation, most of us are not going to last very long. You know, Rob, there's so many stresses in life, especially in our modern society. And if we take away everything that gives somebody joy, pretty soon they're going to say the hell with all of this. And, you know, our goal is to make people feel better, not to make them feel deprived and abused, and to help them to find ways to feel better and to feel good about what they're doing without ingesting substances that are going to make them sick.
And that includes alcohol and other toxic substances.
Yeah, I mean, you know, studies show that I don't drink, but there's studies that show that small amounts of alcohol, which means one very small glass of wine for a woman or up to 2 glasses for a man, can actually potentially be good. The antioxidants in wine can help prevent heart disease and aging, but when you have more than those small amounts, then you cause other damage to your body. And what in small doses is almost medicinal, if you will, becomes a toxin. So it's about common sense and restraint.
Mm-hmm. So treat yourself every once in a while and be kind. Be gentle.
Yeah, but don't binge. And I think allowing yourself little, small amounts of what you like periodically prevents binges. Back when I lived in New Mexico, I was in a rural community where the center of our social life was a potluck that everybody in the community, which was about a 30-mile radius, would come to every Sunday. And I ate really sensibly all week, walked my dogs a few hours, had just an ideal diet, and for the only time in my adult life that I can remember, wore size 6 blue jeans. But while I was doing all those healthy things all week, I studied cookbooks and would come up with the most obscenely decadent dessert recipe that I could possibly create. And I'd make it on Sunday, and we'd all have a little piece of it at the potluck. And then I would feel like I hadn't been deprived and be able to go back on my diet the next day. And other people did what they did. But it was a case where you could have what you wanted without having to binge. And I think that's important. And then there are a number of studies that have shown that staying on, especially a calorie-restrictive diet for long periods of time, causes the body to go into starvation mode, which means that the metabolism slows down as a way of preserving life. And when that happens, people don't even lose weight anymore. So many of the popular diets that are out on the market nowadays are encouraging people to have one cheat day, if you will, once a week, not only because of the emotional satisfaction, but because it keeps the metabolism from slowing down and going into starvation mode.
So we're not starving ourselves.
No, but I mean, we have lots of reasons for allowing ourselves treats. Not only because we don't want to feel deprived, but because it actually keeps our metabolisms better. So, and that's a story that I get into in a lot more detail, again, in Gluten-Free. So I hope some of your readers will pick up that book as well.
I hope so.
Yeah, and it's available on Amazon and on my website, which is jerimillsmd.com.
And in the book, you talk about working with the various types of flowers. What's your favorite type of alternative, I guess, flower?
Flowers?
Not the plants, but the grind up.
Flowers.
Yes.
I use a combination of almond flour, which is just ground up almonds, with just a little bit of a mixed gluten-free flour product that gives me the same kinds of textures as more traditional foods. I love the nutritional impact of using just almonds and the fact that it's low glycemic, which even makes for some products that are better for my diabetics. But at the same time, I want to reproduce products that are so good that not only my gluten-free people enjoy them, but the rest of their families think that they're getting a treat too.
So it's kind of a mixed bag, let's say,
Yeah.
with the different flowers.
The traditional gluten-free recipes that you'll find if you start doing research usually have about 6 to 8 different kinds of flour combined in order to get reasonable texture in the products that they're producing. And not only is my kitchen too small to store 6 or 7 different kinds of flour, I don't want to spend that kind of money, and I don't want to take the time to measure 6 or 7 different kinds of flour every time I throw together a cookie recipe. So what I ultimately did was find one product that has about 5 flours in it. It's called Better Batter gluten-free flour. I use very small amounts of that combined with almond flour and the rest of my ingredients to create some really beautifully textured gluten-free cakes and cookies.
And people love them.
They do. I tested them not with people who are gluten-free because they'll eat anything after a while, but at my writers group, my dance group, National Speakers Association, the Sedona Book Festival, I just passed out samples, and people who normally eat regular gluten-containing pastries bought my book because the food tasted so good. And I think that's the real test of successfully producing gluten-free products. And when we can do that, people who need to be off gluten can get off of gluten.
And Jeri, I think it's helpful to see that, to recognize that it's the gluten, if you found that it's been hurting you, that's something to pay attention to. It's not helping you, it's causing inflammation.
Yeah, it is. You know, I had a kind of a funny little story from a patient I saw at one of the rural hospitals I work in Minnesota. I was seeing patients in clinic one day, and I went into the room where this little 70-year-old man was waiting to see me. I'd been told that he was there because he had a rash. And I walked in and said, "Hi, what can I do for you today?" And he looks at me, says, "Oh, Doc, you got to help me. I've got this horrible abdominal pain. I think you're going to have to do an MRI of my whole body." I said, "Excuse me? I beg your pardon?" And he goes, "Yeah, they've done all these tests already. They've done scopes, and they've done CAT scans, and there's nothing that the doctors do has gotten rid of my pain." So I looked down at this little guy's chart, and sure enough, on the very top of the chart, it says that he's allergic to gluten and to dairy. So I looked back at the little guy and said, "Tell me, how you doing on this diet they told you to be on?" And he sort of flips his hand in the air and goes, "Oh, it's a bunch of hooey. I'm not going to stop eating that stuff. I can't live without bread, and I have ice cream every night with my wife at bedtime. You got to figure out what's wrong with me, Doc." Well, because I have celiac, I was able to sit down with this guy and really explain to him, which I think nobody had done before, how eating the wrong foods causes inflammation and is actually responsible for his pain. But beyond that, back in the days before I had a cookbook out, I always carried a great big manila envelope filled with my favorite gluten-free recipes. So I ran out to the nurse's station and I Xeroxed a whole bunch of recipes for him that were both gluten and dairy-free. And then I brought him back in the room and had already been to the local Walmart, which is in a lot of those rural areas the only place where people can shop within 30 or 40 miles. And I was able to actually tell him what shelves he could buy all the products on. And the only two products that he couldn't buy at the Walmart were the two kinds of flour that I use, almond flour and better batter. And I was able to give him the websites to buy those things. And by the time we ended that appointment, this little guy was finally enthusiastic about making changes that could make him feel better, because he finally was starting to understand, but also because he'd been given simple tools. It wasn't just someone saying, "Stop eating your favorite food," without giving him options of things that he could eat and enjoy. So that was one of my little stories that made me feel like maybe I wasn't wasting my time after all.
And we had a question in the chat, I guess. Does your book contain breads too?
It contains some, what does it have? It has biscuits and it has cornbread. I'm not a bread eater myself. The one time that I do make gluten-free bread, my favorite recipe is a rosemary olive bread that comes from elenaspantry.com. And I couldn't best her bread, so I don't do bread recipes.
Now we have about a minute or so until break. Can you share your links with us quickly so people can find you?
Certainly. My website is my name. It's jerimillsmd.com. JERIMILLS. M as in man, D as in doctor.com. And I'm on Facebook as just plain old Jeri Mills from Prescott Valley, Arizona.
Okay. And come back and join us as we talk more about gluten sensitivity and energy healing with Dr. Jeri Mills.
We're awakened. You won't catch us sleeping through the fight at night. We're all eyes open, showing our inside and light so bright. We are awakened.
Becoming a well-rounded person in our modern society is no easy task. We're much too busy working, raising families, and trying to carve out a few precious moments of peace let alone worry about becoming self-actualized. Hi, I'm Alan Weisberg, founder of School of Human Potential, and we get it. The reason for starting the school was to help people like you become well-rounded and self-actualized without taking a lot of time or money. We found and filmed world-renowned experts and put their knowledge into easily accessible online courses spanning various topics of mind, body, and spirit. You can go at your own pace and access them on any device. To start, go to www.schoolhp.com. Our hope is that you allow us to take you on a journey leading to a new you. Here's to you reaching your full potential.
Hi, this is Rob Ragozzine, host of Your Unfolding Senses. Have you visited my website? It's intuitionbyrob.net. There, you can catch up on missed shows, but there's also plenty more to see, read, and do. You can calculate your life path number and your other core numerology numbers and read what they mean for you in your life. I also have a blog where I cover a variety of topics related to my show, including health, healing, dreams, compassion, and more. I also include videos, interactive intuitive challenges, and other fun games for you to connect into your own senses, body, and intuition. Come visit today. Welcome to Simply Conversations. This show airs every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 Central. Each week, we have a new conversation with a guest who will share their story with us about how they've changed or healed their own life. Listen to our discussion and be inspired. This show is brought to you by simplyconversations.com. Feel free to take part in our chat room, ask questions, and talk with our guests. And we're back with Dr. Jeri Mills. If you have a question, you can add Awakened Radio to your Skype or call 334-649-7204 to ask a question for Dr. Jeri Mills. Now, we were talking about ways for people to reach you before we had our break, and I'd like to ask people if they have upcoming events that the people can come meet you at. So with that, are there any upcoming events that we can come meet you at?
Not right now. I'm actually in the process of getting ready to move. So my life has been put on hold for a couple of months. They can always reach me through my website. There's a contact form, and I'm always happy to write back to people or talk to them when I have the opportunity. And if somebody would like to schedule an event, I'm very happy to appear.
Okay. I was very inspired as I was reading your second energy healing book.
Healing is Believing.
Healing is Believing. And I was reading all about M.D. Anderson and some of the stories that you talked about healing people with Reiki. Can you know some of those stories?
Oh, I'd love to. I sort of fell into Reiki by accident. I started thinking about energy healing back when I was in boarding school in Sedona, Arizona, when I was 16 years old. And my boyfriend introduced me to science fiction and fantasy novels. But for me, it was always just a dream world, something that I read about when I wanted to escape the rigors of modern medicine. And then back in 1993, I moved to Tucson. And I was taking a creativity workshop shortly after my arrival there. And the teacher was a woman with a PhD, and she just happened to mention in passing that she was able to to channel healing energy from the universe into her body, pass it out of her hands, and use it to make people feel better. Well, Rob, my heart lit up when I heard that. It was something that I had dreamed about my whole life, and all of a sudden there was this very sane, bright, educated woman talking about being able to do that. So I met with her a few days later, and I asked her if she could teach me, and she said sure, but then she never did. Well, in the meantime, I was meditating and reading about a lot of modern healing techniques. And one of the meditations that I started doing regularly was a meditation from Shakti Gawaine's book called Running Energy, in which I would simply imagine that I was inhaling green healing energies from the core of the earth, and imagine those green energies swirling up through my feet, through my body, and leaving through the top of my head. And then I would begin inhaling pink creative energies from the universe and feel them moving from the top of my head down through my body and finally out through the soles of my feet into the earth. And that was part of my morning meditation for many months, until one day when I was working on labor and delivery, because I was originally an OBGYN doctor. I was at University Medical Center in Tucson, and the first patient I had to take care of that evening was a little 15-year-old girl in labor. Now, I walked into the room, and there was this little kid huddled in the back of her bed with her arms wrapped around her body, screaming in terror and writhing around like an animal caught in a trap. Our communication was fairly limited because she didn't speak English and I didn't speak much Spanish, and she had almost no prenatal education except for somebody telling her she'd ask for an epidural. Well, Rob, I don't know if you have children or if you've been present when somebody had a baby, but in order to get an epidural, you have to hold really still so somebody can put a needle in your back. And this little girl couldn't even hold still long enough for me to examine her. So I did what was my normal practice back in those days. I took her hand in mine, and I taught her how to do Lamaze breathing. And the reason that Lamaze or meditation breathing works, when you take slow, deep breath in through your belly, hold it for a few seconds, and then very slowly exhale out of your mouth, you actually shift your body from your sympathetic nervous system, the part of the nervous system that would be active when a deer is running away from a mountain lion fighting for its life, and you switch into your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of the nervous system that would be active when a deer felt totally safe and was standing in the middle of a field eating grass. So basically, I took this little girl's hand, and you can do it with me for a minute, but I just, through gesture, because we didn't even have words, convinced her to take a slow, deep breath in through her nose and hold it for a few seconds, and then very slowly exhale out of her mouth. And after about 3 or 4 breaths, I became aware of something happening in my own body. Without even intending to do so, I had started doing the energy channeling meditation that I normally did as part of my morning practice. Only something was different. Instead of the energy leaving through my feet and through the top of my head, the earth energy and the universal energy that I was inhaling into my body was collecting in my heart, moving down my arm and from my hand into the hand of this little girl that I was holding. And all of a sudden, this frantic, terrified, screaming little girl turned into the poster child for Lamaze, and she was elegantly breathing through her contractions like somebody who had done this for years or had had lots of training. And after that, she was in total control. She still wanted an epidural, so we gave her one. And a couple hours later, she had a beautiful, peaceful delivery. Well, that night, I called my friend Diane, the person who was my teacher, who was the energy channeler, and I told her what had happened. I said, I think I was channeling energy. And she said, well, of course you were. Now I don't have to teach you. So I continued to do that with my patients. And then over the years, I began studying other techniques. One of them was Reiki, which added to this natural energy channeling ability that I had found in myself, actually made it much more effortless for me to channel energy so that I didn't accidentally give away my own energy. And eventually I started doing energy healings on all of my patients and offered to do the same thing for my staff when necessary. And what I found, Rob, was that the best way to introduce energy healing to people is not to proselytize or lecture, but simply to fix owies. So if a nurse or a resident had a headache or a sore foot, I took 2 minutes and fixed it, and then I didn't have to spend an hour talking about this cool thing I do. They knew it, and they knew that it wasn't weird, and they believed it, or maybe they thought it was weird, but they knew it was real. So that was kind of how I started. I became aware that I could channel energy, and then started doing energy healing in my medical practice. Over the years, I became aware of something very simple, and that was that once somebody told me that it was possible to do something energetically, and it started when a friend of mine, a teacher of mine actually, who was a shaman, offered to teach me a technique to open a woman's pelvis so that women wouldn't have to have C-sections anymore when I took care of them. And then he never taught me, just like Diane never taught me. But when a situation arose where I had a patient who had had a previous C-section for a 7-pound baby that was too big, and I was doing some energy healing on her during her labor, without even thinking about it, I started doing these gestures and movements with my hands and pulling apart energy lines in a way that nobody had ever told me to do. And it wasn't but about 2 hours after that this lady who was unable to have a 7-pound baby the first time around pushed out a baby that was over 10 pounds and didn't have to have a C-section. And then I found over and over throughout the years that whenever I hear or believe that something is possible, even if I've never learned how to do it, I can when a need arises. And that was where the title of that book came from, Rob. That was why I called it Healing is Believing. Because I believe, I know that once we believe that we can do something, whatever it is, we can. It's only doubt that seems to be the standing block, whether we're talking about healing or any other accomplishment in our lives.
Jeri, I really liked where you were talking about how the patients in labor were able to sleep through the night just with Reiki.
Yeah, it was very cool. Once I finally came out of the closet, I started offering Reiki treatments to every single labor and surgery patient I took care of back in those days when I was working at UMC. And I did find that. During the first half of labor, when a woman is in labor, basically she has contractions and her cervix, which is normally closed, dilates until it's a 10-centimeter opening. 10 centimeters is about 4 inches, I guess. And that's the size of the diameter of a baby's head, and then the baby's head can come out and the baby is born. Well, during the first part of labor, the woman has contractions every couple of minutes, lots of pain, but until she gets to about 4 or 5 centimeters, if we give any pain medicine, be it drugs or epidurals, we tend to stop their labor, and then they end up having C-sections. So what I discovered when I started doing Reiki treatments for all of my patients was that I could give it as soon as they got admitted to the hospital. And a lot of them they all relaxed. Some of them even went to sleep after the treatment. And occasionally they'd even sleep until it was time to push. But at the very least, they all seemed to be comfortable and very often sleep until they got to be 4 or 5 centimeters. And if they got uncomfortable at that point and they wanted drugs or an epidural, they could have them. And one of the reasons that I got away with doing energy healing in the most conservative hospital in Tucson, Arizona in 1993 is because I never stopped practicing Western medicine. So if a patient wanted something else that was considered appropriate care in those days, I didn't say, oh, no, I have something better. You can't have an epidural because I'm going to do Reiki whether you want it or not. That would have been assault. I offered them whatever they needed. I mean, people are going to suffer when the kid's 15. They don't need to suffer when they're in labor. So my attitude was to do whatever was in my patient's best interest, but also in her choice. And I think that was how I got away with bringing energy healing into the hospital and seeing some of these little miracles happen along the way. And, of course, all of those stories are in Healing is Believing. And also a lot of them are just in the articles that people can read on my website.
Now, Jeri, that brings up another point. And it's a good question to ask you as a doctor. What kind of changes would you actually like to see within all of healthcare? Some real alternative care.
I would like to see something that is actually finally beginning to happen. It's certainly, people thought I was very strange 20 years ago when I was doing energy healing in the hospital. And even when my first book, Tapestry of Healing, came out about 13 years ago, people thought it was really weird for doctors to be doing energy healing in the hospital. I've often said that first book is more current nowadays because nowadays people are much more aware of these modalities. What I'd like to see is, and what's happening in some facilities, is a group of practitioners working together with respect for each other's specialties and knowing enough about each other's specialties that they feel free to call on somebody else when they believe that their modality will be of use to a specific patient. So while I may be practicing Western medicine and doing energy healing for a patient, it may come to mind that homeopathy would be a good option for that patient, say somebody who's been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. We know that homeopathy can be incredibly helpful for that condition. And while I've taken about 100 hours of homeopathy courses, it's enough for me to understand what it is and enough to know that I better not be trying to prescribe any more than basic homeopathic remedies with my amount of knowledge. So I need to know who to refer to. And we're seeing that in lots of facilities, and I think the best of medicine is when we get to the best of healing. Nobody's going to be able to be an expert in everything. There's too much knowledge out there. But if we can know enough so that we know who to refer to, and we're seeing more and more respect between the Western and the more traditional healing modalities. And the more we're able to throw away our prejudices, Rob, and embrace all of the knowledge that we have and all of the skills that we have as a species on this planet, I think that's when we're going to see a true revolution in healing.
And Jeri, you were talking about, I guess in the first book more so, the difference between true healing and curing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I can, and you may have read my favorite story, which I would love to share now, but we see people so much nowadays thinking of their bodies kind of like a car that breaks and can be taken into the shop and fixed. They don't want to have any participation in the healing, but they also don't see themselves as body, mind, and spirit. They see themselves almost as a mechanical entity. And what we all need to understand is that while sometimes we are, whether it's with Western medicine or Reiki or acupuncture or Ayurveda or homeopathy, sometimes we're able to heal the moving parts and to help somebody to live longer and live better. But life is a cycle, and part of that cycle is death. Death is not the enemy. Death is merely part of the cycle. And when we're looking at healing, we need to think about healing as affecting body, mind, and spirit, which can mean two things. It means that if there are emotional or spiritual issues that we carry that we haven't healed, they can result in physical problems and problems that manifest in the physical body. But it also means that we're more than just a physical body, and sometimes healing is about comforting the spirit. And my very favorite story to illustrate that goes back to when I was in Findhorn, Scotland at a conference back in 1996. And there were a few hundred of us sitting around in the big lecture hall when the Therapeutic Touch instructor was asked to speak to us all about the difference between healing and curing. So I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden this 6'4" Greek god slowly unfolds himself from one of the chairs. And I'm looking up at this man with my chin hanging on my chest. He had long, curly, dark hair and these amazing brown eyes. And then in a soft, gentle voice, this guy who looked like he should have been a movie star, but was actually the director of nursing of a geriatric ward, began to address us. And in his soft, gentle voice, he told us the story about one of his own experiences when he was working on a geriatric ward. He was taking care of a little lady named Mavis. Now, Mavis had never been a big woman, but at 98, time had weakened her bones and put a curve in her spine, and the cancer that had been eating away at her for many years had whittled her down to a tiny little creature of about 80 pounds. And Steve was one day helping Mavis to get up out of a chair. He was standing in front of her. Steve, as I said, was about 6'4". He bent down, put his arms under the elbows of this little 4'10" woman, and he began to lift her out of a chair while another nurse stood behind Mavis and gave her a little boost from behind. And all of a sudden, Mavis is standing in front of Steve, and he's holding her up, and she looked up at him. She got a little twinkle in her eye, smile on her face, and she said, this reminds me of the time I was a wee lass. Me da would hold me in his arms, and he'd dance with me. Well, Steve, being Steve, shrugged his shoulders, looked at the other nurse, and he said, come here, do me a favor. Put her feet on top of my toes. Well, the other nurse looked at him like he was a bit crazy, but Steve was her boss, and she'd seen him do some weird things before, but he never hurt anybody. So she came around to the other side of the chair, and while Steve had his arms around the little old lady, the other nurse very gently placed each of the woman's feet on top of Steve's toes. And then Steve gathered the woman up more carefully into his arms, just like a father might hold his child when he was about to have his first dance with his little girl. And he began humming a little tune and waltzing around the room, holding Mavis gently in his arms. And then after a few minutes, he took her back to her bedside, very gently helped her into bed, tucked the covers up under her chin. She looked up at him, tears of joy and remembrance shining in her eyes, and she said, thank you. And then she closed her eyes and drifted off into a peaceful sleep. A few hours later, her spirit left her body, but she died healed.
And that's a very beautiful story.
I love that story. And I think it tells us so much about how much more we are than just bones and hair. We really are about spirit, and healing can be just bringing joy.
Just bringing the joy and letting go. Be having great gratitude.
Yeah.
Now, Jeri, unfortunately, we're at the end of our show. Is there anything that you'd like our listeners to know about you?
Well, I would like everybody to open their minds and their hearts to the possibility that there is more to healing than just taking pills and having shots and having the parts fixed, and to hopefully look into some of these other modalities. For me, energy healing is the most beautiful thing that's come into my life. It's brought so much grace and so much peace into my life. And I hope that people will be interested. You can certainly start by reading more just by going through some of the articles that have actually been posted on my website, which is jerimillsmd.com. Again, I'd love to hear from you if you like to write. I do have a newsletter if you care to sign up for it. And I hope that you'll take the time to read my books, Tapestry of Healing and Healing is Believing. and I hope that they will help spur you onto a journey of healing. I thank you so much for being here tonight, and I thank you, Rob, for having me with you.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. You're wonderful. And I encourage people to look for your books, especially if they have any type of gluten or celiac disease. And hopefully it can help them to take their own steps towards healing.
I hope so.
And thank you for coming on, and I'll send everyone the links. They'll be in the forum. And if you go to Simply Conversations, you can find Dr. Jeri's site. It's linked right at the top of the page. And I'll also put in the links to the books. So thank you for coming on, and we had a great time.
Thank you, Rob. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you. That was Dr. Jeri Mills, and you can find information about her in the forum and again at simplyconversations.com. Now, if you enjoyed this show and you're so inclined, donations here are always greatly appreciated. We're largely host and listener supported, so if you can find it in your heart to donate whatever you can, we're not asking for your grocery money, it's always appreciated. So that would be something nice, and we'd be extremely gratitude-filled, grateful for your donation. And the donate buttons have moved, but they're the large yellow buttons generally at the top of each of the screens. You can also contribute to Thrive Magazine. It's past the 20th when the deadline is for that month, but you can post an article for this March and spring, so you can get started early and have an article ready all for the spring, and we provide your bio and a link back to your site from your article or your poetry or your artwork. And that's Thrive Magazine. You can find it by coming to awakenedradio.net and clicking on the Thrive Magazine tab, and we appreciate anything that you'd like to share with us, and you could be part of our growing community. So please do find some of your creative projects that you've started and contribute them here, and we'll share them and help you become more popular. I also have a dream class coming up starting on March 8th. So if you have been interested in exploring your dreams, this is a marvelous opportunity to do that, in that we don't just talk about what the symbols mean from looking in a book, but we look at the personal meaning of each symbol in your dream and find ways for you to explore that meaning in your own life. So it's sort of like getting a Christmas gift, opening it up, and being excited about it because now you were able to look in the box and take out whatever's in there and begin to integrate that within your life. So if the dream is talking about relationships, well, now you can begin to heal the important relationships or bring in new relationships into your life. Or if it's talking about money, the same thing. We can now bring that money into our lives and heal and work towards eliminating any issues we have around it. You can also go to simplyconversations.com and read up on and listen to my past interviews with previous guests. So it's another chance to catch up on the archives. And again, our archives are also uploaded to iTunes and TalkShoe, but I link to them, to past guests and their shows as well, from simplyconversations.com. So that's another way for you to catch up on the shows that you may have missed. And thanks for tuning in today. We'll be back next Sunday with a new show, and stay tuned for that next week.
Cause we're awakened, you won't catch us sleeping through the fight in life. We're all eyes open, showing our inside and light so bright. We are awakened.